During my career as a puncher, from the age of 17 till 19, I worked as a manual Shifley pantograph puncher. Every stitch that I did was one stitch at a time. I did work on other pantographs which actually created jacquard paper tape, so it wasn't doing it live time, from the machine directly to the loom all the time. I did learn how to read paper tape, and that was a great thing because you didn't have to be perfect all of the time. You could actually digitize the tape. If you found an error, you would redigitize that section of the design, and then you would cut and splice that tape back together, and you could do mass production on these Shifley looms by literally doing millions of pieces and rewinding the tape as you went forward. So that really is kind of the golden age of embroidery, where there was mass production for yard goods and for emblems. Now, with regards to digitizings, things did change very quickly. And I remember when I was 19 years old, after 2 years of being trained as a manual Shifley puncher, we had this new machine come into our factory, and it was called a Melco Digitrack. And I really wish there would have been more things over the years that I had saved, but unfortunately, like most of us, we just disregard things and pay no attention. I did actually save this. This is actually the crosshairs on my Melco Digitrack. You have to remember that the Melco Digitrack had a big board on it, and on the board there was this piece, and there was basically a little computerized thing there with function keys, and F09 was needles out, F11 was needles in, F02 was to start, there was slow speed, fast speed, needles in, needles out, start design, stop design. All the commands that you would actually put into a design were done on this little keypad, and then you took this and you lined up the crosshairs and you'd literally digitize on the big board. Now, another thing that I did save was this little contraption here, and this actually is something that we kind of made to fit on the original board, so that we didn't just have the crosshairs, we actually had something that looked like a little nail that went onto it. Now, the reason why is, on those old pantograph machines, when we did this back and forth 12 hours a day, there was a sharp pin on the very end, and as we were punching the designs, we would make sure that we pushed into the paper because it was on corkboard, and you'd make a little penetration on the paper as you were moving forward. See, a lot of people thought that it was called punching because you were punching holes in paper tape. That's really not the facts. The facts is you were punching holes onto the paper draft. And the reason why is, if you wanted to take a break and you stopped the loom from running and then you came back 10 minutes later, or you had lunch, how would you remember where you were? You basically would see where you had the little penetrations. Well, on that first Digitrack, we were so old school that the idea of having a crosshair was kind of foreign to us, so we made this little piece as an accessory that was a nail, and we would literally push it into the paper tape so that we could keep track of where we were in the design. So it was kind of a really cool time because we could now digitize or punch a design on a big board, and we could actually do what was called marks. And you have to kind of think of this in the same way as objects, because we were going one stitch at a time, but now we could put a mark 1, 2, 2, 2, and it would fill that area in with stitches. That was the first evolution of computerized digitizing, was that board-based system. If you wanted to do a curve, you would actually take the width of a curve and you'd put a mark 1, 2, a 3 perfectly placed between the width of the stitch, and then a 2 and a 2. That 3 defined the curve, but it also defined how much it curved out from the end or in from the end as it created the object. So it was really a revolution in the industry, because we went from digitizing things one stitch at a time to be able to create an object as a fill or a satin stitch and actually have it spit out 8-channel tape as you're moving forward. Now, the cool thing was, in those days we didn't even have floppies. There wasn't 5 1/4 inch floppies or 3 1/2 inch floppies. Everything was on paper tape, and we evolved from jacquard paper tape to 8-channel paper tape. And there was this cool machine called a facet, and the facet actually spit out the paper tape. This is where I had fun because I was the youngest puncher in the factory and I was not afraid of technology, and I got to work on the Melco Digitrack, and all the old school guys thought it was some, black magic contraption that came in. But I was actually able to digitize an object, and if I digitized a fill, I would actually do the points on that fill, hit the enter button, and I'd have to go for a coffee break because the facet had such a small amount of memory in it that if I went much further, it would actually freeze the facet up. So it went from being one of the most tedious jobs to a job where I basically had to take a lot of breaks. Now, after the Digitrack, we did evolve to computerized systems, and this was another miracle because we could actually see our stitches being generated on a screen. And we moved from Digitracks to board-based systems, and this is actually one of the 4-button pucks or cursors that I had for my board-based system. It was a mnemonics tablet, and I remember digitizing on DOS version software and actually creating designs. Now, our first software that we used when we started creating designs for Schiffli and then for Multihead was made by a company called Wilcom, and they are still in existence today, and actually they are to this day the world leader in digitizing software. And you might not know this, but we are an official Hatch reseller, which is a program made by Wilcom. So we've had a very long relationship with Wilcom. I've been using their software for well over 25 years, since the DOS days, and it really did revolutionize the industry to the next step, being able to create object-based embroidery. They have come out with so many innovations of fabric assist and complex fills and incremental density control. Now, here's the thing. The software does a lot of the job for us, but I have to be honest, a lot of that theory, the stuff that I learned from my Schiffli mentors, to this day, I still implement that into the designs that we create. And in my opinion, that's the difference between being a good digitizer and being a great digitizer, is having a foundation to build on which goes beyond the software. Now, besides the advancement of the digitizing software, my family also got involved with the advancements with regards to embroidery. And we saw that in the early 80s, we saw the industry start to go to what was called single needle embroidery machines and then multi-needle embroidery machines. Now, our first computerized embroidery machines didn't even have trimmers on them. I remember our very first machine was a single head, single needle Ultramatic machine, and it actually did designs on a hoop. And that's really where the industry evolved, because you have to remember the Schiffli machines had yards of fabric spanned up on looms. You couldn't hoop a shirt onto a loom. You actually did emblems or yard goods. When the multi-head machines came out, we actually now had a cylinder that came out, and the items could be tubular. We could actually do shirts and sleeves and things of that nature. And you had multiple needles, which means you could run multiple threads on the machine at the same time. So the industry did evolve very, very quickly. And as it evolved and as we grew as a company, we outgrew our original factory. Now, because my grandparents had a factory in a residential area, once it was filled to capacity, that was it. There was no place to grow. So we ended up starting our second factory. And from the time I really got involved in the industry in my early 20s and into my 30s, we ended up opening our second factory. We had 136 multi-heads. We added 2 more Schiffli machines. I remember we did an average output of about 10 million pieces of embroidery a year. Actually, our partner at the time was the largest manufacturer of sporting goods, jackets and sweatshirts and baseball hats. We did licensed good, but he was a Canadian manufacturer, and we kept those machines running 6 days a week, 24 hours a day. Between the ages of 19 and 28 was the time that I was probably most involved with the manufacturing within our company. I was doing a lot of the punching for our factory and for our partner's factory, but I also was very much involved with the production within our own factory. And I remember watching machines and working night shifts when nobody else could fill in, and spending many, many hours running all of those multi-head machines. We actually had 12 head, 24 head, and 18 head machines, and they had up to 9 colors per head. So we were doing huge amounts of volume as far as production on baseball hats and golf shirts and sweatshirts. I remember that my grandfather was a little frugal, and he did not like the fact that bringing a tech in to repair a machine or do timing on a machine or do maintenance on a machine, he thought that the prices that they wanted for doing that type of work was just crazy. So he elected for me when I was 19 years old to go to New Jersey and learn how to tear apart a Tajima machine and put it back together. So I really did get a good foundation, not just of learning how to digitize a design, but also how to run machines in production, as well as the mechanics of the machines and what made machines run well. See, when you're doing embroidery and you're trying to make money with embroidery, it's a totally different animal. You don't just want designs that look good. Most importantly, they have to run well on the machine. You want the embroidery to be soft. You want it to feel like part of the garment. There can't be unnecessary trims or jumps. A lot of people don't realize it, but you lose 120 stitches of production every trim that you have in a machine that's unnecessary. That's 120 stitches worth of money that is now gone from the equation. So we were very careful about all of those areas of running a business, because it really did come down to the bottom line. At around the age of 26, I got to admit I got a little bit restless. Growing up in a family business that was, started by my grandfather, and my mother was working in it, and I did obviously participate in the growth of that business, I kind of felt like I had something to prove, like I wanted to create something of my own. So I did start a separate company that was underneath of our Dress Crest embroidery company umbrella, and it was a company called Punch Perfect. Now, I did learn something at that age, is never put the word perfect in a company name. I should have called it Punch Pretty Good or Punch Okay, but I called it Punch Perfect. And if you use the word perfect in your company name, you better be just that. Now, luckily, after years of punching and digitizing for our own factory and learning how to create designs that were soft as well as being cost-effective for manufacturing, we became popular very, very quickly. And within a short period of time, we actually ended up having 6 digitizers underneath myself. I trained them all from scratch. We had 4 artists on staff. We actually digitized for over 500 companies globally at the time, for people who did manufacturing all around the world. And even after I kind of closed the business down, I didn't shut it down because it was losing money. I basically shut it down because I moved into the home industry, but we still had an active customer base going. And the reason why is that even though most punch houses had disappeared by that time, we were still in business because our designs made people money. If you're going to spend $30 or $40 more with somebody but make $4,000 or $5,000 in production, which one are you going to choose? And it was also at that time that I started to develop a little bit of a reputation for ourselves. To find those active customers, I started doing consumer shows. I did the DAC shows, the ISS shows, all of the commercial type of shows. And I remember one of the first catalogs I did, and this is kind of unique because my grandfather had many words of wisdom. He always said to me, John, if you want to be successful at something, you got to be first or different. And if you can be both, you're going to be successful. Well, I did a little catalog for Punch Perfect, and this is the original catalog, and it's kind of a little creative spoof on the National Enquirer. Anybody remember those days? But I actually did it with pieces of embroidery that were on the inside. So when I gave these out to people at trade shows, it wasn't just giving them a printed, brochure. It actually had something unique to it, and I also included some education about the process with our pricing and everything else. And I made it a little bit of fun and funny. And I think that's part of the reason why we grew so quickly in that industry, was because we were essentially a little bit different than everybody else. Now here's the point where the story could have taken a turn for the worse, but luckily I was kept on path. I was kept on the straight and narrow, and I gotta be honest, that was my mother's doing. I actually had a problem at around that time between the age of 26 to 28, maybe getting a little closer to 30, but I actually got bored. And the reason why is, between the ages of 17 and 27, I had spent a decade as a commercial puncher. I literally digitized thousands of designs a week, and I lost count of how many times I digitized the letter A. And I gotta be honest with you, if you want to take the joy out of a job, just make it repetitive day after day, you know, month after month, year after year. And that was kind of the rut that I was feeling. And I remember at that time going to my mother, who was my boss, and I said to her, I think I need to move on. I think I need to do something else in life because I just don't think I can do this forever. And she basically read me the riot act and said, you know, suck it up, sunshine, we need to move on with this. But we did come up with a little bit of a compromise. And the compromise was that she let me, for 2 to 3 weeks of every year, lock myself in my office and do stuff that was just for me. I've always considered myself a creative person by nature. I'm not an illustrator or an artist, but I am creative, which I think that would be for all of you as well. And I was able to go in and start to do some creative punching, some real stuff that brought passion back in it for me. And that is really where my entire career turned around. So it was 1995 when I had my first session of locking myself away, and in 1996 I actually entered some of the pieces that I did in commercial contests that were happening at around that time. And I remember the first year that I entered contests, I actually won 7 awards for digitizing. And I thought, wow, this is easy, but I should have saved some of my ideas for later on. But you have to remember that in the commercial industry at that time, winning prizes for what you did was actually a pretty big deal. And if you did win the grand prize, you actually got your winning design on the front cover of the magazine, and you got usually a prize worth $25,000, and it was a little bit of a claim to fame. And that was a little bit of my goal, or my motivation, was I wanted to win a grand prize. And that did happen. In 1998, I won my first grand prize with EMB magazine for a hat that actually utilized 3D foam. But it wasn't just a regular hat with 3D foam, it actually had 3 layers of foam, and nobody had ever seen anything like that had been done in the commercial industry to that point. And it was because of that one hat, and because I had a desire to be creative, that it really did launch my entire career in the commercial industry. After I won that grand prize, they actually asked me if I would like to start writing for the trade publications. And I did write for EMB magazine and Impressions magazine, and I wrote for some publications in Europe. And then after writing for those publications, they asked me to actually start speaking at some of the trade shows. And I did speak at the ISS shows, the NNEP shows, the DAC shows. I even got a chance, the very last year that Bobbin World was still around, I got a chance to speak at Bobbin World. It was kind of ironic because I started my career 17 years old going to Bobbin World, and in the commercial industry I finally reached what I considered was the end-all be-all, and I really feel blessed to have been able to have done that. But I did spend a lot of time immersed in the commercial industry as an expert, and I taught seminars and classes on digitizing, on embroidery techniques, and also on workflow and how to have a profitable embroidery factory running. Now, I wish I could say that being an educator came naturally to me, but I gotta be honest, it didn't. I remember when I first started giving presentations, giving classes in the commercial industry, I can rank them as being pretty much terrible. Now, to give you an idea, I gave a whole day class on digitizing with an overhead projector and an easel with markers. And that was about the extent of it because we didn't use PowerPoint in those days. And I gotta be honest, there were some incredible educators and teachers when I came into the the industry that mentored me, took me under their wings, and taught me a lot about presenting in that type of arena. I remember one of the gentlemen who took me under his wing, and it's kind of funny because the first year that I came into the industry was the same year that he left the industry. He was actually being inducted into the Embroidery Hall of Fame, and I remember I was honored because he asked me to sit at the head table with him, and his words to me right before he basically had his little speech and was honored on the screen was, he said to me, "John, you have to make me one promise." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "You have to promise me that no matter how long you do this, you'll always tell people about where we began." And the reason why he said that is because he was actually a Shifley baby. He had grown up in New Jersey, and their family had a factory that mass-produced Shifley, and he understood that it was an industry that was essentially disappearing in North America. And as somebody coming into this industry as an educator when he was leaving, he felt that it was important for somebody to carry on, I guess, that information or the legacy. And that's exactly what I've done. If you've been to any of my seminars over the last 25 years, I've always spent a little bit of time letting people know how our industry began and how we've gotten to where we are today. Because I think where we are today is based on where we came from. Thanks for watching our second History of Embroidery Digitizing videos. As you can see, the tools used in the beautiful art of embroidery digitizing have changed and evolved incredibly over the last 35 years. I do want to mention quickly that although the technology and software used to digitize and create embroidery designs has changed, one thing hasn't. That's the theory behind creating these designs. Whether I was using a 1905 Shifley machine 35 years ago, or modern embroidery digitizing software like Hatch today, the exact same theory and rules still apply when creating embroidery. Although modern embroidery software is amazing, you can't just buy it and expect to be able to create and edit your own embroidery designs. You first need to know the theory behind it. It's kind of like using a calculator. You'll need some basic math theory to be able to use it. Simply owning a calculator isn't going to balance your checkbook if you don't know how to add or subtract. Now these days it can be hard to find much information on embroidery digitizing theory. Why? Well, after apprenticing 10 years to become a Shifley master, do you think these guys wanted to share their trade secrets? Of course not. It was job security. In fact, before I wrote my book, Digitizing Made Easy, I wasn't able to find barely anything published on the subject. To fill in this knowledge gap and pass on the theory I was so blessed to have received, I've since created our fan-favorite Digitizers Dream Course. If you'd like to learn more on how to create and edit your own custom embroidery designs, or simply learn more about the beautiful art of machine embroidery, the Digitizers Dream Course is for you. Check out the link below and learn more now. The next step or stage of your embroidery legacy starts here with ours. Also, stay tuned for our next History of Embroidery Digitizing video. Hi, John Deere here, and thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like down below. To join the legacy now, hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit the bell to be notified every time we release a new video. It's no mystery, award-winning embroidery is our history.